Our first inductee, Dr. Alva Clutts, a 1945 Western Kentucky University graduate, was among the first women business pioneers. She received her bachelor's degree in social sciences and history and education in English. Dr. Clutts, who now lives in Dallas, served on the faculty in the School of Business Administration at Southern Methodist University for 14 years. As is the case with Western graduates, Dr. Clutts always gave more than was expected of her through her extensive commitment to community service.
Her beginnings were in Kentucky, but Texas has been the recipient of Dr. Alva Clutts' academic and volunteer accomplishments during her distinguished professional and personal career. Dr. Clutts attended Western Kentucky from 1942 to 1945 and remembers the university and community playing integral parts in her educational development.
They treated us as adults. They treated us as friends. They were our mentors. They opened doors to the broader world and opportunity. I never felt that we were students here and the teachers were there. And often they took the initiative. It wasn't limited to the teachers. The staff were involved as well. I remember people who were in the administrative staff. I remember people in the dormitory for a brief period of time that we lived in the dorms. The entire environment was one of helping, of exposing one, of opening doors. I think a large part of that, of course, had to do with those of us who were involved with the College Heights Herald.
Although Clutts planned to become a lawyer after graduating from Western, it was Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, where her teaching career was established. One of only 10 women to receive a PhD in business administration in the U.S. in 1955, Clutts' tenure at SMU from 1964 to 78 was one in which she made a difference for many of her students.
Dr. Clutts had a unique ability, I think, in looking at students as friends and as someone that she could relate to personally. And at that time, many faculty were the detached professor that was, and I think they identified with that, and I think it helped them pull them into the learning experience in ways that many professors could not do.
But making a difference wasn't limited to the classroom for Clutts. As a member of the University Park United Methodist Church in Dallas, Clutts' volunteer service had an impact on many. As a board member of the Pastoral Counseling and Education Center in Dallas, she worked closely with that organization's growth in serving the city. And her tenure as chair of the board of directors of the Wesley Rankin Community Center is characteristic of her contributions to the Dallas community.
And Alva brought a very strong leadership style that said this has to get done. We have people who need this work done in this community, and so she certainly was an incredible blessing to us at that time.
Accomplishments are measured through various means. Dr. Clutts' contributions can be measured through her work and efforts to give something back.
Well, I think it's the most wonderful thing that ever happened, outside of children and husbands, of course, and they come first, but it really is. It's wonderful. And as I have told people with whom I spoke, I'm most humbled. I'm certainly not one who has accomplished individual things and great things, but I'm thrilled and really sort of choke up.
She's a teacher who has made and continues to make a difference to many. 1995 Western Hall of Distinguished Alumni inductee, Dr. Alva Clutts.
I really am overwhelmed, and I hope you can hear me. I have been warned that I must have notes so that I will not take advantage of the time for other inductees. I first saw Western Kentucky State College with a friend from my high school senior class. We were guests of Western for a weekend. Now, I had heard about Western many years before and in fairly recent times in my high school career, because I have cousins who are sitting over here with me who had told me the great story of Western Kentucky. I want to tell you about a gentleman who really was influential at that particular time and critical time in my life. He was Mr. Will B. Hill. Do some of you remember him? He was the field representative for Western Kentucky, and he was responsible for my friend and I being invited to Western. And as I remember, I think he actually drove us to Western Kentucky, where we spent the weekend. Helen and I were so impressed that we actually signed on as Westerners, and we never looked back. That was the only undergraduate school for us. Eventually, we would hear a wonderful story about Uncle Billy, and we heard other wonderful stories at Western. It seems that Uncle Billy had a momentary brush with fame. During those years, a renowned contralto, whose name was Madam Schumann Hike, gave a concert in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And as she exited the stage, she leaned over and kissed Uncle Billy on his bald head. I'm not sure whether all the audience saw that or not. 50 years later, in fact, a little more than 50 years later, I still hold dear this special, truly special environment in which I was privileged to spend my undergraduate years. And I specifically hold dear to me those persons who were responsible for that special undergraduate career. And if you will indulge me, I would like to share some names. I think some of the people here will remember them. Robertson, I'll give you last names. Robertson, Anderson, Egbert, Petit, Denman. Do you remember the history faculty? Wilson, Cornett, Moore, Richards of the English faculty. There's a long list, and I'm going to ask you to indulge me just a moment more. McChesney and Stonecipher, Billings and Guy, Taft and McKinney, Lemons, Marks and Griffin, Cuthbertson and Whitmer, Helm and Neal, Hornbeck and Diddle. These wonderful people, who were both faculty and staff, took the initiative to become our friends, to become our mentors, as well as our professors and staff advisors. They introduced us to a larger world. They advised us on our possible career choices. They even helped open doors to our further careers. I remember and appreciate each one, and it would not be appropriate for me and my memories not to have you hear their names. One person in particular became and continued to be a quiet and ever-present influence in my life during the entire time I was at Western. This was Frances Richards. One of my special memories is having an occasional lunch with Miss Richards, as we called her, at her invitation at one of the hilltop spots. Even when her students left the campus, she stayed in touch. My husband and I were able to visit Miss Richards in her family home one summer while we were in Kentucky. She also visited us briefly in Dallas one year as she was on her way to California, and I would like to tell you this story. While in our home, we had asked Miss Richards if she would like to see our slides, and we were tremendously enthusiastic. We were still pretty young and just out of school, and we had made our first trip to Europe. She was gracious, as you would expect Frances Richards to be. In her very gracious and genteel manner, she assured us that she was anxious to share our travel log. So we began our slideshow, and we were tremendously excited. We absolutely could not do it hurriedly. We were reporting to her in endless detail. I have to assure you, it was endless detail what we had seen. I mean, we were really excited about that. When we began our slideshow in the early evening and began to continue our report, she was very interested, as you would expect her to be. She asked questions, she smiled, she nodded in response to our commentary. When it was time for us to turn on the lights and have our intermission, we discovered that even this lovely lady could not hold back the Sandman. Exhausted from her long bus trip from Kentucky to Dallas, she had fallen asleep. I have a lot of wonderful memories, and I think that's one of the marvelous fallouts of this particular occasion. As I began to remember Western and those 3 wonderful years here, a lot of memories surfaced, and I would like to just rapidly share with you some of those. They were very meaningful to me. We used to have a wonderful time in the spring, walking in the spring rains across the old Ogden campus. I'm not sure I can identify it now, but perhaps I can. My younger brother, who is now deceased, was my escort to one of the Talisman dances. I remember being introduced to the Old Masters by Mary Ruth Lemons and to the Human Brain by Dr. Billings. Frances Anderson, one of our special history professors, made ongoing references to what she called spicy stories of history, which of course she never shared with us. We had our first political experiences as we elected our class officers each year. I remember the camaraderie and the commitment that we felt as members of the College Heights Herald, and one of my dear friends who had that experience is here today, sitting at one of the tables here, and I'm excited to see him. I can remember finally sitting forlornly in an empty football stadium after graduation. I also remember the remoteness of the war initially, and yet I remember its ultimate intrusion into our lives. We co-eds learned to write an occasional sports story for the College Heights Herald. We even covered the most recent basketball game with Coach Diddle and his ever-present towel. Most of the male sports reporters, of course, were no longer here because the military had intervened in their lives. I remember the special kindness of a Scottsville businessman who made available his printing establishment to us when, for some reason which I don't recall, war had intervened and we could not continue our publication with the Bowling Green newspaper. That was certainly a temporary thing. I remember also the sadness when I returned from class one day to find a distraught classmate who had lost her fiancé. He had been killed on Iwo Jima. I remember seeing the notice of FDR's death as it came over the wires as I was working at the Bowling Green paper on the upcoming edition of the College Heights Herald. And finally, we were idealistic, but we truly believed that we would accept the responsibility for the world as our world. We were confident that our lives could count, and that we could and would make a difference. Today, I am most appreciative and humbled to be a part of this truly distinguished group of persons, the Western Kentucky University Hall of Distinguished Alumni, persons of achievement whom you have met, whose lives clearly demonstrate the importance and the success of this university. I choose to believe that you have accorded me this honor and this recognition not because of any particular achievement of mine, but in a way that does acknowledge the legitimacy of effort, that you have recognized the significance of the journey, and I thank you for your kindness and your approval.